Welcome to Module 2, Basic Elements. In this module, we'll talk about some key elements that are used throughout the application. We'll talk about lookup options and link fields, date fields and other common elements, notes, inquiries and reports, and finally help options. In key elements, we'll talk about some of the key things that you'll see within the application when you first get started, things like the home page and things like that. If you take a look here, we have the home page we'll talk about, navigation pane, which is part of the home page also. We'll talk about the area page. We'll talk about the address bar, the toolbar, and then the window menu bar. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the application again. And if you take a look here, this is the main screen and is also often referred to as the home page. And the home page can be unique for each individual user. You can go ahead and design it as such where your particular home page might look different than somebody else's. And in fact, there's a place that you can go ahead and set your role, like we saw earlier, and each person's role can also have unique assignments as far as what they would see on their home page. If you take a look here at the home page, in this particular case, you can see it says Brian's home page, so it's his home page. And we have sections here, and you can see we've got a section down here for to-dos, and you can see we have invoices and orders, so maybe I'm a salesperson, it looks like, in this particular case. Quotes are on here. So I have a section where I've got some items that I need to be working on. And I also have an area where I can see a whole bunch of reports, and in this case you can see just a couple reports on the list, but there could be many reports there. And then links to windows that I might use quite often can be set up in the quick links area. You can see the business analyzer area section here of the home page is empty. And the reason that is because I don't have anything set up as far as graphics, etc. for Brian. But I could certainly do that and see graphics of things like maybe sales each month or whatever I wanted to do here on the home page. Let's go ahead and click the Customize This Page icon up here, and we'll just take a quick look at that particular window here. And I can go ahead and customize. It keeps disappearing on me. Sorry about that. There we go. We'll get it better. So you can see that the sections that we saw, we had the Business Analyzer section, so we have that turned on. We have the My Report section, quick links to do. So we make a choice here on this particular case of how we want our home page to look. So I could take off sections, etc. And I can even decide, like, do I only want one column, two columns, which is what we chose. I could even have 3 columns. So I can change the way the window looks. And if you click on the Change Role button here, you can notice it just gives me a little warning message here. That's supposed to come up there. So it just tells me if I make a change to the role, I'm going to lose some of my things like quick links that I have set up. But I can go ahead and change the role here to any role I want. So let's say, for example, initially when it was set up, I was set to be the accounts payable clerk. I really should be accounts receivable. I could come in here and make the change within the window and assign myself to the new role so that I get to see information that's more pertinent to myself. I'm just going to cancel out of the window here and get back to the home page. So you can basically customize the page, and we talked a little bit about earlier where you could assign your security role. You can also assign the home page role. So I'm going to go ahead and pop into one of the administration windows here momentarily, and we talked about how you could set up a role. I'm going to pop into the user setup window, and you can see here that you can change your home page role here or assign the home page role. So this is where the system knows which particular information you want to see on that page. We talked earlier you can set a security role, and we pointed this window. It's actually in the security window related to user here. If I close down user setup real quick and go into user security, this is actually where you do the security role. So you have a home page role and a security role. They're just in 2 separate windows, but they're both user windows. So that's the home page. The home page, like I said, is the window that you'll see first, typically when you come into Microsoft Dynamics GP after you've completed your login information. One part of the home page that we haven't talked about yet is the navigation pane, although we've been using it here. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So I'll go ahead and go back to the application. And the navigation pane is considered to be this left-hand side of the window where you see different choices. And I'm going to just go back to the home page here momentarily. So you can see that we've got choices up here like user preferences, which we talked about in the last module. But you also have some other areas here, and you can see I could expand this. This is shortcuts. So I can set up shortcuts to other applications. So in this case, I'm going to a website, customer source, which if you're a customer of Microsoft Dynamics GP, you might spend some time out there. Also have some report shortcuts. So particular reports that I use a lot, I could go ahead and create a shortcut and add those into the window here so that it makes it easier or quicker to access those windows. There's also a bottom area where it's more related to navigation than anything here. You can see all along I've been clicking on different options as we've talked about some of the different areas. We went into the administrative area where we saw the user windows, but you could also go into areas like financials and sales, and we talked about a little bit about those areas when we discussed financial management and the options that were available in General Ledger and in the other modules like sales order processing and receivables. And you'll notice at this particular point there are a number of buttons there. There is a way to expand the amount of buttons that you have because, for example, you do not see anything about human resources or payroll. There's a way to do that, and if I go ahead and just click the little expansion here and choose Show More Buttons, you can see now I have an HR and Payroll button on the list here too. And I can remove buttons also, so if I don't have HR or Payroll, I can say Show Fewer Buttons, and if I didn't have Inventory, I could do that again to remove the buttons on the list. So the navigation here on the window can certainly be controlled, which buttons you use. You can take them off. And you'll notice here I didn't necessarily say you could take off ones above, you could take them off below, but there is a navigation pane options selection where if, for example, maybe you didn't use, I don't know, let's say you didn't use purchasing for some reason, even though it's up on the list, if you did want inventory to show, you could take purchasing off the list just by unchecking the box. So a little bit more option there if you choose the pane options window. Back up, it wants me to back up for some reason, right? So we've talked about the home page and the navigation pane. So the next thing we'll talk about is area pages. And area pages are basically the landing page in each of the different financial areas, like we talked about administration, financial, etc. So let's talk just a little bit about those. So I'll go back to the application. And the first area page here we'll just start with is the administration area page. And the area page is pretty much consistent. You'll see this type of a breakdown where you have like setup, routines, cards, and windows related to that. One of the things that you'll notice is that there is kind of an expansion area here at the top, and you can go ahead and close and open those. So if there's areas that you don't really need or use, you can basically control what you see in the window, so you don't have to do quite as much scrolling in the particular pane areas within the area page. If you don't use any of the company windows, you can certainly close those up and make it easier to see what's available in setup that you do use. There's also ways to edit and make some changes on those. You can see that there's some icons in here. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about that, but you do have some modifications that you can make. And like I talked about, there are different area pages. This is the administration one. We have one for financial, so this is all the financial related windows, which would include general ledger windows, bank reconciliation windows, multi-currency windows. You can see here we've got some currency windows in the cards area. So each area is separated basically by this option, this series option. So we have the sales area. This is more for sales order processing and receivables and so forth for purchasing and inventory. And the area page can be used for navigation, and it's certainly an area where most people tend to go with, but we do have some users that also still use some standard navigation that's still available, and we'll talk about those here in the next couple of topics. So we've talked about the home page, the navigation pane, and the area page, and next we're going to talk about the address bar and the toolbar a little bit, and then we'll finish up with the window bar. So the address bar, if we go back to the application, we have a couple of different things that you can go ahead and do on the main page, and we'll talk about a few other things also in the bar. There is navigational capabilities from the top, so if you don't like navigating to windows using the area page, you can certainly use the bar up here, the toolbar, and you can go ahead and go to choices here. These are more system-related windows that are under the Microsoft Dynamics GP window. There's also other areas here. You can see transactions. And so the way to navigate with the toolbar up here is you certainly can go ahead and use that instead of the area page. It's kind of similar in how the area page is arranged. If you use General Ledger, for example, you go to the Financial tab or the Transactions tab and then go to the module. So you start more with the action that you're completing rather than the module itself, but it does allow you to get to some of the same windows just in a little bit different way. And for users that have used the product longer, they tend to use the navigation at the top in the menus more so than others because that's how they're used to navigating, because we used to not have area pages a few versions ago. We also have another area up here that you could use for navigation, and you can see here that it just says Home, Sales, Sales again, so multiple windows, but you could go and click on one of the drop downs here, and you can see at the home you could go to any of the buttons that you see on the side. If I go into sales, I have some of the same types of options that I would have either on the area page or the drop down menus, so I could go to customers, etc. from there. So multiple different ways to navigate within the application, including what we talked about on the navigation bar, which is of course getting you to the area pages. Similar to the other areas, we talked about how cards are the master records. So here you can kind of see it a little bit more. We don't have some of these set up, but field service type windows are on the cards menu. We don't have the buttons on the navigation pane. So all the different cards all in one place, regardless of where you go, all the reports and all the inquiries and so forth. So more arranged by the activity that you want to do rather than module related. So that's the address in the toolbar. We talked a little bit about how you can use different ways to navigate most of that information right from the home page, whether you use the area page, the toolbar, or the address bar. Let's also talk about inside of Windows within Microsoft Dynamics GP and some of the options that are there. So we'll go back into the application, and I'm just going to go ahead and open up a window here, and to make it easy, I'll just click on the Financial tab, which is a really straightforward area. Most everybody has General Ledger, and I'll just open up a window. In this case, I'll just open up the Account Maintenance window. And so this is the window where I would set up accounts in General Ledger. So if I had, a sales account, an expense account, an asset account, etc., we've talked about that earlier. And on the window, there's a group of menus that are pretty much consistently common in all the windows that you'll see within the application. There are some windows that are relatively small with only maybe one or two choices that you might not see something like that, but it's fairly rare. It's typically almost available on every single window within the application. So if you take a look here, we have what we call a menu bar, a window menu bar, and up here on the top, we have a number of choices. We have File, Edit, Tools, Help, and each one of these choices has some options underneath. So, for example, I'm opening Help here. You can see I can access, printable manuals, which are, documenting the information within each manual that we have. There's even a What's New section, so you can see what's new in version to version, and there's also Help, accessed from there. There's also a Tools menu where you can go in and access things like, if you go to the Integrate tab, you can, Table Importing Integration Manager, which is a tool that allows you to import information into the application. Even macros, which allow you to play something that you do over and over again, so you don't have to do. So choices off the menu. Edit is usually more within the application, things like Insert Row, Clear, Copy, Paste, the typical commands. And the File menu, you can see fairly limited, but you can do printing options from there. And the window menu bar is usually helpful to use in a window where you have something unique that you need to do, like you need some help on the window. There is also a printer icon located over to the right, and in most cases the print icon usually involves printing some type of report. For example, in like a transaction window, it would print an edit list or something like that. So that's the window menu bar. There we go. So in this particular lesson, we focused on more of the home page, how to get around, a little bit about the navigation, and even a little bit into the window menu bar and the different ways that you could access things within the application. In the next lesson here, we'll go ahead and start talking about lookup options and link fields. And lookup options and link fields, if you take a look at the slide here, we've got a sample of a lookup window. In this case, it happens to be the vendor lookup window. So when we get into the application, we'll show you some things there related to lookups that are available. And we also even have some advanced lookup options. We'll just briefly touch on those. And you can see I've attached a screenshot here to our slide. So you can kind of see in that window here, in this particular case, I've got the customer window as the lookup window that we're making changes to, and we've added a couple of unique sorting options that maybe I don't need in a lot of cases in some companies, but I might in others. I'm able to sort by city, by zip code, etc. So it gives you some additional options on top of what's already there within the application as far as doing lookups. So let's start with lookup windows within the application. So I'm going to go ahead and go back into the application. And we're going to go to the sales menu. So we'll use the customer window and just talk about the lookup window that's in the receivables management module. If I click on the lookup window, which is pretty much standard, if you see a lookup window within the application, you're typically going to see the icon here that looks like a magnifying glass, and it will open up a window. So in this case, you've got a listing of customers. And if you take a look here, the listing of customers is every customer in my company. And it's sorted basically by, typically by what we consider the master field or a key field. And the key field is probably the best terminology for it. And the key field means that basically that sort is a really good way to sort the file. In other words, not a lot of work to sort by that file, and it's fast to do that. In this particular case, the sort by customer ID would be what we would consider our sort, or key sort within the window. And if you take a look here, you can see we also have other sorts. Customer name is another common sort. And some people do not necessarily do what we have here. If you look in the sample company, we have a customer, it's basically using the first, groups of letters of the customer's name. So the sorts look like they're in alphabetical order, but it could also be that you don't use any letters in your IDs. You might just use numbers, and so then you can sort by both ID and by name. And you can change the sort simply by clicking on the sort so that you could switch the way it's doing that. There are also some additional sorts, and you can see in this particular case, because I've added some, I might have some additional sorts available because of the advanced sorts that I would have set up earlier. So in this case, the additional sorts in the window, you can see I can do by class, by type, by sales territory, by salesperson, even by a corporate customer number. So I've got some additional sorts available there, and then even by custom sorts if I want to, and I can go ahead and create those in a different window. So lots of different options to go ahead and select a customer. And if you have just a few customers, certainly how you set up the customer window is probably not as important as if you have lots of customers, because if you have 5,000 customers, to find one in the list could take you some time to scroll through and look for the particular customer you're looking for. So it's advantageous to think about how you want to set up customers prior to doing that, so that they sort easily in windows where you're entering transactions, for example, or even doing some type of an inquiry on the customer record. You can also notice that we have a find by customer ID up here, so you could just simply type in the ID as much as you want to and then hit the search options. But I'm going to just cancel out here momentarily and get back to the main window. And one of the other things that you can do is, let's say, for example, that you're in the customer maintenance window or in a transaction window for that matter, where you're in a situation where the customer ID field comes up. And if I type in just the letter G, for example, and then hit the lookup window, notice what happens. Instead of going to the top of the list, which we saw that there were some A's in the list before, in this particular case, I hit the letter G, and I went right to the first G in the list of the lookup window. So there is faster ways to do it, and I used just one letter here, but I could have typed in, like, for example, GR, and it would have went to the first GR customer in the list. So advantageous to use some of the built-in features also within the application to make the lookup process go faster. And this particular lookup window process that we're talking about is available throughout the application. And you can see even here on this window, there's numerous lookup windows. There's address IDs, there's ship to address, territories, classes. So the concept of the lookup window is a global feature within the application. In other words, it's used throughout the application everywhere. So understanding what the lookup windows can offer you and how to use them the best is certainly a good example of a feature that you'll need to know when you start using the application. I want to just talk about one other thing briefly, and you'll notice that there's the lookup icon. If you hold it here, if I can get the help to pop up, and it doesn't even matter if it does, but Control L will also open the window. So there it is, lookup Control plus L. So if you are on the window and you don't like to use a mouse, for example, you could use Control L to open up the lookup window also instead of using your click of the mouse. So that's lookup windows. And we talked about that there are advanced lookups, and we saw that there were some additional lookups available for the customer window. You could also add some additional windows like we showed you within the advanced lookup setup window, and those would also be available on that window under the custom sorts area. Let's talk a little bit about browse buttons next. And the browse buttons, you can see we have an example here of the browse buttons and how they look in the window. And so let's take a look at the browse buttons and see what they offer within the application. And again, these are pretty much a global type of feature that you'll see within many windows. For example, in the customer maintenance window, the vendor maintenance window, etc. Not specific to any one area of the application. Pretty much a widely deployed feature within the application. So I'll just use the customer maintenance window here for our discussion. And you can see at the very bottom here we have the browse buttons that we're talking about. And I'm going to go ahead and just select the customer using the lookup window that we just talked about. And you can see here I pulled up Aaron Fitz Electrical, which is a customer here for our sample company Fabricam. And the browse buttons will let me do something. Instead of using the lookup window and scrolling through the list, I can use the browse buttons to move through the list. So I've got a chance to move to the next customer, so I can go ahead and just simply click the browse button here, that's the next record one, and move through the list. I can go to the previous records using the browse button here also, and I can also go to the first one in the list or the last one in the list using the browse buttons. And you'll notice that there's also a drop down next to the browse button, so I can do that by numerous things. In this case, in the customer area, I could do it by name or class, etc. So choice to basically move through the window records a little bit quicker and faster using the browse buttons, especially if I'm fairly close. Maybe I typed in GR and it's not the right one. I could use the browse buttons to just get to the right GR customer in that case. So the last thing we'll talk about in the lookup options and link fields area is link fields. And link fields usually do one of two things. It takes you to another window within the application so that you could go ahead and enter information. There's also what we call an expansion window, so that's a little bit different. But link fields, remember back in user preferences, we showed you how you can make them look differently. So makes it a little bit easier, quicker to be able to notice those within the application as a user. If you might not be familiar with the window, you can still be able to notice where the link fields are. So let's take a look at an example of that. So again, I'll just open up the customer maintenance window here, and you'll notice that there are numerous link fields on the window. And in this particular case, for example, let's just use the shipping method. And you can see that that's underlined and different color. And in this particular case, if I click on that link, I open up the shipping method setup window. And so the link field lets me go ahead and look at what shipping methods are there. For example, maybe I'm entering a customer and I don't know what shipping method to choose. You could certainly use the lookup window to sort through the list, but you could also go right to the shipping method setup window and look at the shipping method yourself here. You could also see some additional information. So, for example, maybe I thought, well, I'm going to use ground, right? So I want to see what ground is. I can see what choices were made there, which is not something I can see in the customer maintenance window, because all I get to see there is the shipping method and what I called it. So the method name itself, I don't get to see the information that's below here in the window. So the link field allows me to get a little bit more information about the topic or area that I'm talking about here. So lookup windows and advanced lookup options. You can set up additional lookups, and we also have link fields that you can use, browse buttons, different ways to access information within the application. And like we talked about, all these are basic elements that you'll use throughout the application. Lookup windows you'll find on almost any window within the application. Oftentimes you'll find link fields, browse buttons on a lot of the key record fields and transaction fields. So very helpful to understand some of the basic concepts here as you get to start using the application. Next, let's talk about data fields and other common elements. And some of the things here that we'll talk about, the first thing is entering dates. And dates are really critical within the application. Almost every transaction that you enter obviously will have a date associated with it. The date of that transaction is usually key. For example, reporting purposes on balance sheet or a profit and loss statement in general ledger, you have to have transactions by date. A trial balance, for example, usually date is a key sort. So how to enter dates within the application, very important, and we'll give you some options here and show you some of the different ways that you can record and enter dates. So let's go ahead and go back to the application. And we'll go ahead and move to a different area this time for our demonstration. And we'll go into the financial area. And we're going to just open up the bank transaction entry window. So this is an entry window in the bank reconciliation module where you could enter a transaction, such as a check, for example, that you paid somebody. Maybe you ordered flowers. You don't want to set up the flower vendor. You just need to do this as a one-time type of check. You could record that type of a transaction here in the transaction entry window for bank transactions. And if you take a look here in the window, one of the first fields that comes up after you choose what type of option, in this case enter transaction, I'll just tab through those options. It asks for a transaction date. And there's numerous ways that you can enter the date. You'll notice right now that a date defaults. And that date that defaults happens to be the system date. And the system date is a date that you set right when you come into the application. And you can also change it off the main window, which we can show you in just a few minutes. But that date defaults on transactions. So if you update that date each day as you come into the office, if it's the 5th of January, for example, you set it to the 5th, the next day is the 6th, and so forth, that date will default automatically for you. So it makes it a little bit quicker and easier for you to enter transactions on that date. Now, there could be some transactions that end up on a different date, and that's where entering the date might come in to play. So let's take a look again at the bank transaction entry window, and you can see that our date defaulted to 4/12/2017. And let's say it wasn't the 12th of April there, it's the 17th. So there's a couple of different ways that you could enter the date. One of the ways certainly is to just type in the whole date, 04/17/2017. But you could also just simply type in 17 because we're in the same month and year. So in this particular case, it fills in the same month and year from our system date and just simply changes the date of the month to the 17th from the 12th. So that's one quick, easy way. You can also do it by month and day. So if you're within the same year, you could say, well, no, it's May 5th. You could type in 05/05 and it would keep the year for it. So a little bit of flexibility within the date field so that if you're within the same month or the same year, you could simply save some keystrokes there. But you can also click on the little icon here that kind of looks like a calendar, and you can see it defaults to whatever date you have in the transaction date field. And in this case, it's showing 4/17 because we already changed it from the 12th to the 17th by typing in the number in the field. But you could go ahead and use the calendar here, and there's scroll buttons to scroll through by month, and you could go ahead and choose to change it to whatever, and you could even go to today's date, whatever the date is. So possible to always make a change there using the calendar. And there's also an expansion button here that goes ahead and allows you to change the transaction date within the system, and even a posting date, which is the date that it actually gets posted with. The transaction date could be different than what you post it to General Ledger, for example. So multiple ways to change the date within the application, and again, these options are pretty much consistently available wherever you go within Microsoft Dynamics GP. We talked just briefly that you could change the date or the system date, and our system date defaulted to 4/12/2017 when we came in, and that's done right off the main window. So if you take a look here at the main window, Great Plains GP, you see that we have the date down here below. So if I was in a window and I wanted to change the default date that it was going to, I just would click on the date field down there, type in a new user date, and that becomes my default system date wherever I go from now on in the application. So if I change this to say 4/14, it would go ahead, and now anytime I went into a transaction entry window, it would default to 4/14 rather than the 4/12 that was originally there. So that's entering dates within the application. Next, let's talk about accessing expansion windows within Microsoft Dynamics GP. So if we go back to the application, expansion windows are numerous throughout, and so I'm going to go ahead and go to a different area we haven't been in a while, and that's the purchasing area. And I'm going to just open up the vendor maintenance window here, and we'll just select the first vendor in the list here. And you can see on this particular window, we've got lots of fields here. You could go ahead and enter things related to the vendor, like their address, their city. We have lookup windows, but there's no expansion windows here in this particular window. So let's click on the options button. And if you go ahead and click on the options button, we have a few more things here in the window that you can see. We've got some buttons where you can make choices, and we have some drop-down menus and some checkboxes, but still no expansion windows, so we don't have anything where we have extra detail or data associated with it. So there's some cases where you might not see any option windows, there might be, or expansion windows, there might be some that you do. If you click on the accounts, here's where we would see some within the vendor maintenance window. So in the first two windows, we didn't see anything like that, but in this particular case, this is accounts that are assigned to the vendor so that we want to default. So when we enter a transaction in payables management, if we want to do a transaction against Ace Travel, we could go ahead and say, hey, I want to default this accounts payable account or this purchase account when I go ahead and use Ace Travel. And you can see to the right here, we do have some expansion windows. And we have them for each of the accounts listed. And if I click on the expansion windows, which are usually an arrow, you can see that in this particular case, it opens up an account entry window. And in this particular case, it's doing something which allows us to set an alias. So the window is basically related to the account entry of that account. So typically, the expansion window is going to offer you some additional information related to the field that it's attached to. So I'll go ahead and just close out of that window. So you have numerous expansion windows here within the vendor account maintenance window. And those are, again, scattered throughout the application. But like I illustrated, not necessarily on every window. We've got the vendor maintenance window with nothing. The address window didn't really have anything, although it had some other unique things. But not always necessarily that you're going to see the expansion windows throughout the application. Typically in transaction entry windows, you're going to see them in a number of cases like batches and stuff like that, where you can transition to another place in the application. So we've talked about accessing expansion windows, and now let's talk about making selections in Windows. So talk just a little bit more about what we saw in some of those vendor maintenance windows, where you could make different selections using like checkboxes or buttons and so forth. So let's go back to the application, and we'll go back into the vendor maintenance area where we were at. And again, I'll just reselect the first record. And we'll go to the options window where we were just a little bit ago. And you notice, like we talked about, no expansion windows, but there are some unique things here that we haven't seen in some of the other areas of the application. And we have a number of different ways that you can pick things within Microsoft Dynamics GP. One is certainly a drop-down list where you basically drop down a menu and you make a selection. We also have radio buttons where you just click on the button that's specific to what you want to make a selection in a field. And we also have sometimes a field that has a bunch of checkboxes. And the bunch of checkboxes usually means that you could make multiple choices in that particular field, whereas if you have a drop-down menu or if you have radio buttons, usually you only get to have one selection. So let's just take a quick look at that. On the screen here in vendor maintenance options, if you take a look here, we've got a couple of fields. The tax type field, where we have a drop down. You could choose whether it's a tax type, it's not a 1099, it's a dividend, interest, miscellaneous, etc. Or you could even choose a radio button where maybe the minimum payment is not no minimum, but you want to go ahead and choose an amount or a percentage for a minimum payment. So one choice in that particular case with the radio buttons, one choice with the drop-down menus. But the last field down here is maintain history. And in this particular case, it's asking about what types of history you want to keep on the vendor, in this case, ACE Travel. And we have calendar, fiscal, transaction, and distribution. In this particular case with the checkboxes, I could decide to keep certain types of history and not others. So you'll notice here I unchecked fiscal, maybe I want to uncheck calendar. So in this case, I would only be keeping transaction and distribution history for ACE Travel and not all four kinds. So just different ways that I can make selections within the application. And I'll just discard the changes there. So now that we've talked about some of the basic things within a lot of the windows, one area we haven't really gotten into is scrolling windows. And scrolling windows are pretty common in transactional areas, and inquiry windows would probably be the two most common areas where you'll see them. And there's some functionality related to the scrolling windows that's a little bit unique compared to any of the other windows within the application. So let's go ahead and go back to our application, and let's go to just a general transaction window. And one of the things that you can certainly do within a transactional entry window is enter information about the transaction. So in this particular case, we're in a general ledger window, and you can see the typical fields like entering the date of the transaction and a few others. But down below here, we have the scrolling window, and in this particular case, we could enter in account information. And one of the things that you could do certainly here, I'm just going to enter in an account number here and an amount. So I'm just going to make it a small amount. And when I go ahead and enter, usually in general ledger, I have to have a debit and a credit. So I'm going to just go ahead and do that to balance the transaction. And you can see down here it shows that I've got a $400 debit and credit. Difference is 0, which is one requirement for posting the transaction within general ledger. But there's only one line of information, so all I see right now is, if you look at the top of the scrolling window, I see the account number more or less and the debit and credit amount. And there is an expansion button here, and if I click on the expansion button, we call this the hide and show area. So the top button is hide and the bottom button is show. And you can see when I click the show button, it allowed me to see some additional information. Instead of seeing one line per debit and credit, I see multiple lines. So I see the description. In this case, that's the account description. So I'm seeing, in this particular case, I've got computer equipment, I'm cash operating account and computer equipment, debits and credits. So I'm seeing a little bit of information about what account that I'm hitting. And including that, I could add a distribution reference. So I could say, hey, returning computer equipment, so got a cash refund or something like that here if I wanted to. So additional information that can be shown, but you could certainly hide that information if you don't need to see the other information on the screen here in the scrolling window. I'm going to just go ahead here and choose to delete the transaction and close out of the window here. Within the application, that's one thing you'll see in scrolling windows. There's a couple of other things, and I'll use an inquiry window to show you something that could be also helpful and valuable there, similar to what you saw in hide, show, and transactional entry. So let's go ahead and go to the sales area, and let's just look at transactions by customer. And I'm just going to pull up the first customer, our trustworthy Aaron Fitz Electrical. And you can see in this particular window again, like we saw earlier, you see that we have a listing of all the transactions in this case for Aaron Fitz. And this particular window shows information, whether it's historical or current, or even just entered in as a transaction. And again, we have the hide and show button here. So in this particular case, a little bit different than what we saw in the financial area. You can see we see document information, date, write-off amounts, etc. So a little bit more information. And then on top of that, one of the things that you'll notice is we have link fields within the scrolling window. So if I have my highlight in this particular case, say like on the first transaction, I could actually click on the document number, and by doing that, it's what we call a zoom or drill back, as sometimes some people will call it, and I can go back and look at the original transaction. In this case, it's taken me to a sales order processing window, so I can see in this particular case, it looks like somebody ordered an answering machine. So the customer is getting an answering machine. You can see information about that. So I can drill back and look at information related to the transaction right from the receivables entry window all the way back to where it originated in sales order processing. So I've got link fields right on the scrolling window area here that allow me to see some additional information. Then there's also even an expansion window here where we saw where you opened another window. In this case, it's a transaction revaluation, which has to deal with multi-currency, so we won't do anything there. But you can see that it opens another window where you have access to additional information. Let's go ahead and just close out of this window. And let's go up and use sales transaction entry window, which is in sales order processing here. And let's see if we can't find an existing document here. It looks like we have a quote. And within the sales order processing module, you basically are allowed to enter multiple line items. The customer might be interested in, let's say, 5 to 7 items, and you want to put them on the quote. Well, when you add the items to the quote, usually they're just simply right down the order, right? The first item goes the first line, the second item you put in goes in the second line. But what if you decided after you did 3 or 4, you wanted to insert something in the middle of the list, maybe because it was related to the item above? That's certainly possible to do, and if you go back here to the sales transaction entry window, you can see up kind of towards the top of the window where we saw kind of our hide and show before, and we still have that capability. It looks a little bit different in this window. You can see it's, in this case, hide details and show details on the same button. You just click it, and the icon looks a little bit different depending on what format it's in. But there's also 2 icons to the left here where we have an insert row and a delete row. So if you have a line item that you want to insert in between, you can insert a row in between, add the item if necessary. And if you made a mistake on a row, you could certainly highlight it and choose to delete the row also and remove it from the list. So it gives you some flexibility in how the, in this case, quote's going to look, but it could certainly be applied to other items like invoices within the window. So that's data fields and other common elements. We've covered lookup windows, scrolling windows, some different things, different elements within the scrolling windows. So let's go next and move on to the notes feature. And the notes feature, there's really 2 different kinds of notes that you can focus on. And one is what we would call window level notes. And window level notes are basically attached to a window. And you can also do record level notes. And by record level notes, we mean attached to an individual record. So for example, if you're in the customer maintenance window and you pull up a customer and you want to go ahead and attach a note to that specific customer, you can do that by using the record level note. Whereas if you use the window level note, it would be there regardless of what customer was up on the window. So it's not specific then to the individual customer. So let's just take a look at the note feature, and we'll start with the window note. So I'm going to go back into customer maintenance here and pull up a customer. And so this is Aaron Fitz Electrical again. And this is the customer maintenance window, and so I can attach a window level note at this point. And if you take a look down at the bottom, there's an icon there, and it's the Add Window Note icon. And if I click that, it gives me a field here, or a window, I should say, that you could go ahead and type in a note. Now, typically this particular type of note, because it's attached to the window, is not going to have anything to do with Aaron Fitz. Even though you have Aaron Fitz selected on the window, the note is going to be attached to the window itself. So when you go ahead and type in something here, that note's going to be visible regardless of who you have selected in the window. So even though I have Aaron Fitz now, if I had somebody else, this note's going to also be visible to them. And so the most common use that we usually see people using window notes for is general help instructions. So for example, you might say, do not add customers without approval. So maybe you don't want anybody entering new customers except, maybe the accounting manager or something like that. That information, once I go ahead and click Attach, we'll go ahead and make a change in the window. You'll notice I'm back to the customer maintenance window in this particular case, and there is going to be a change to the window that tells me that there is a window level note there, so that I can go ahead and click on that note and read that note and see if that's applicable to me. So in this particular case, if you look back to the customer maintenance window, you'll notice that the note changed, and in this case it looks like somebody wrote on the note. And if I open that now, I can see what the note is, and you can see it's exactly what I typed before. So, and regardless of what customer I'm on here now, you can notice as I scroll through the list, if I go to Alton Manufacturing, for example, the note is always here. So the note is attached to the window and not the customer, regardless of who I've got selected in this particular case in the window. So I'm going to go back to Aaron Fitz, and we'll talk a little bit about the other type of note, and that's the record level note. And the record level note, like we said, is attached to an individual record. So in this particular case, we're going to show you a customer, and the note that we're typing in this particular case would be attached to just that customer. So it might be something unique that the customer wants you to do, like maybe always ship, UPS ground or something like that. So you could basically make some type of comment that's unique to that customer, but not to other customers. So if you take a look, we have Aaron Fitz Electrical up here, and rather than using the window level note, which we demonstrated earlier, we're going to show you how to use the record level note. So in this particular case, the note field is right beside the customer ID field, and if I click on that note, you can see in this case I've got a similar window that we saw earlier with the window level note, but we've got a record level note because it's Aaron Fitz is associated with this note. So I could say always ship UPS ground. And this note will only be available to Aaron Fitz. So if I go in and scroll through the list like I did before, it would not be available for like Alton Manufacturing or any other customer, because they could have other unique notes associated with them. You can see again the similar option here is to attach the note. So I'll click Attach, and if you take a look at the window, similar type of thing, the icon changes. And you can see that we do have a visual IQ that there is a note attached to Aaron Fitz Electrical. Now if I just scan here one vendor back, and I'll just say, yep, save that note, because I didn't save earlier. You can see Adam Park does not have the visual cue that there's a note attached, because there is no note for Adam Park or advanced paper here. It's just on that first record, Aaron Fitz. So if I go back to Aaron Fitz, I see the visual cue that the note is there. Now there is one other type of note within the record that you can do. In this particular case, we just type text in, but we also have what we call an OLE note. It's an object link embedded note. And that particular note is a little bit more complicated to attach, but not necessarily very difficult. It just requires a few extra steps than just simply opening the window and clicking attached. So let's go ahead and just take a quick look at that. So if I go back into the note area, you'll notice that there is a paperclip icon here. And if I want to attach a file here or something like a picture, for example. One of the things that you'll maybe see in some customers or use of this area is if I have inventory items, I might want to go ahead and attach a picture of the inventory item. So I could use the object link embedded option here, click on that and add the note here. All I would have to do is find the file, the picture of the file, and move through a couple of steps to attach that. So basically it allows me to do a little bit more than just simply a text note. I could go ahead and add a picture of an item. Maybe I could even put in a picture of the customer, the person that I'm dealing with, the primary contact. So lots of different uses of that note. And I'll click attached here and go back. You could also delete the note. You'll notice that there was a delete option on the window, so if you no longer use the note, you could certainly delete it, or you could blank out the note and click attached. You could type in something different if the note changes, or if the information you want to add to the customer in addition to what's there already. So possible to modify or change the note over time also. And notes are available throughout the application. I just showed you the note area for customers, but you have the same options here. This is vendor maintenance. You have the window note option, and you also have the record level note option here within there. So you could attach notes to vendors, to customers. There's accounts, almost anything as far as master records are concerned allow you to attach the notes. So that's notes. So let's move to the next lesson and talk about inquiries and reports. And inquiries and reports are probably one of the key areas that you'll see within the Microsoft Dynamics GP system. Lots of people obviously value reports, and there's lots of different ways to get reports. In this particular course, introduction, we'll focus mainly on the reports that are available automatically within the application, but you could certainly use other reporting tools. We've talked briefly about Report Writer, which allows you to modify, add fields, change fields, remove fields. There's also ways to use Word. We talked about briefly Word templates. There's Excel reports. There's even reporting services, SQL reporting services reports. So lots of different ways that you can get reports out of the system. But we'll focus, like I said, mainly on the reports that are there. And we'll also talk a little bit about inquiries and some of the capabilities there. And we've touched on some of those on earlier lessons as they related to topics that we were discussing. But we'll show you just a little bit more in those areas. So let's go back to the application and take a look at some of the reports that we have within the system. And in this particular case, since we're in the purchasing area, we'll just go ahead and go to the trial balance report, which happens to be the top report there. And you'll notice that in most cases, this is the type of window that you'll get from a reports area. If you're within the standard reports that come with the application, you'll get a drop-down menu in this case, and these are all the different trial balance reports, in this case in payables that you can get. You can do an age trial balance, one with some more additional options. You can do a historical age trial balance and a quick age trial balance. So I'll just stay with the age trial balance. And let's go ahead and click on the word new down here. And this is pretty typical, again, of most report areas. Once you click on new, this is creating what we call an option. And an option can basically be entered for a report. And you can save those selections so that you don't always have to make the same selections over and over again. An example where that might be valuable, let's say you print a trial balance at the end of each month for payables, and you always make the same selections. Well, rather than having to come into this window, make all the selections, and then hit print, you can go ahead and create the option, save the choices to the option, and whenever you come in and print, you can select that option instead of making the selections again and just simply have it generate the report for you automatically. And in just a little bit, we can show you how the option works, because you saw that there was probably an option if you looked in the first window. We'll add a second option here, and then you can see where you could select it. So in here, you can just simply name your option, and I'll just say training option since we're doing this. And you can basically do a lot of things on the window. You can answer questions about how the report is sorted usually. You can do some types of restrictions. You notice here there's a date restriction. There's even some other choices down in the bottom where you can do range restrictions on different options. So just questions about how you want the report to be printed here within the application. And including there's some, where do you want to have the report sent? You notice here in this particular case, it's default, it's sent it to the printer. So I could uncheck that and say I want to normally go to the screen. So different choices that you make of how the report should print. Once you make those choices and you save the option, you can close the window. And we talked about briefly how you could create the option. Here's where you'll see where the option comes into play. Now that I've created the option, I could print that same option over and over again without answering the same questions that I just spent time on in the report window. So you can see in this particular case on the payables trial balance report option for the age trial balance, I now have the training option here. So if I select that and insert it into the print list, I can just click print to print the report. So possible to use the same option over and over again for the same report. And you could have multiple options. Maybe in some cases you print the trial balance one way, but in other times you print it another way. So you can see there's a demo option in here that was created in the sample company. So I could go ahead and insert that one and print it the other way if I wanted to too. And I can remove the other one because maybe I'm not doing both reports. So it gives me some flexibility in how I want to do a report and how I want to print it without having to answer the same questions over and over again. And I can also even go in and modify one of these options. So if, let's say, something changes, I can click on, in this case, the training one that I created and click modify, and I could go in and make changes to something. Maybe instead of, sorting it by vendor ID, I wanted to sort it by vendor class, and I could just simply save it. And then going forward, it would basically have that capability to sort by vendor class whenever I printed the report using the training option demo there. So standard reports, that's a typical report option window. There's certainly different questions that you'll run into on each of those windows depending on what you're printing there. But in general, you basically have an option window where you create the option and then you answer questions related to how the report should be printed. And those can be saved like we talked about. Now there are other places that you can print the reports, and let's just touch on a few other options as far as reports go. If you go ahead and take a look here, I've got my home window up, and you can see in this particular case we're on the area page. So all the reports here that you saw on the left-hand side. But if you go back to the home page, you'll notice in this case I've got some reports listed on the My Reports section. There is a button within each report window that you can add it to My Reports. So if there's some real common reports that you print all the time, rather than having to move or navigate to find the window to print it, you can just go ahead and print it right from your home page. So you can have those listed out here. Easy to just simply click on that and go and print it. There's also areas within the system, in this case on the navigation pane, where you could go ahead and access reports through there. You can see here that there's reports, all reports in the system, My Reports, custom reports that you might create in different applications, and Smart List favorites. Smart List is a feature that allows you to access data a little bit differently and print reports from there. And we'll spend just a second talking about that in just a minute. So a lot of different places where you can print those reports within Microsoft Dynamics GP, not always necessarily navigating into the application, finding the window, selecting the option. You can add shortcuts on the main window. You can use the navigation pane to also add that quick access to reports. One other place, if you take a look, there is the Reports menu up here. So if you like to navigate using the toolbar, you can certainly go to Reports in each of the different areas, and you can see how they're segregated or sorted by the types of reports there also. The next thing we'll talk about is inquiry windows, and inquiry windows let you view data online. And inquiry windows are probably similar to reports in a lot of ways, but instead of getting a paper copy or an output to the screen, if you print the report to the screen, you're basically accessing the data real time. In other words, you're hitting the files directly, and it's displaying the information on the window. And you have some of the same options that you see in reports. You can restrict usually on most inquiry windows. You can limit what you see by different sorts, etc. So let's take a look at some of the inquiry windows, and then we'll talk just briefly about Smart Lists. So let's go ahead and go into a sales inquiry here, and we'll do a transaction by customer. We've been in this window before. And let's just pull up and look at Aaron Fitz Electrical again, which is our first customer. And in this particular case, you'll notice some of the same capabilities that you saw in the reports area. We can answer a few questions, so I can sort here, in this case, by document number, by document date, whichever I prefer. I can even restrict that, so maybe in this case, instead of all, I want to restrict it for a range of document numbers, I could. And I can also decide what tables that I want to go ahead and limit it to. So if the transaction's already a historic transaction, so maybe it's from last year that I want to go ahead and look at, or maybe older transactions, maybe I'm hunting for a certain one, I could restrict it to just historical transactions instead of seeing my current open or even unposted work transactions. So it gives me some flexibility in what I want to see. So in this particular case, we've got all three of the boxes checked. We have work open in history, so if I wanted to just restrict to one, I could go ahead and just simply limit it to history. And if I click redisplay, you'll notice that all I see now is historical transactions. So I don't see any of my open or work transactions. We talked about the hide show button, so if I need some additional information, and we also talked about the drill back or link fields where I could see additional information, so I can see where the transaction originated. So the inquiry windows allow me some flexibility into seeing what I want to see, and I can limit it also using some of the restrictions that I see on the window, and even in cases of the hide show, seeing some information either by one line per transaction, multiple lines if I need to see some of the additional fields that I see located here, like document date, due date, etc. Most inquiry windows do have a printer icon, and if you notice up at the top, if you click the printer icon, you can also print most of the windows as the report. So in this particular case, it's set to go to printer, but I could turn it to the screen, and if I click OK here, you can see that I get a report out, and this is basically the same information that I saw in the inquiry window. So I see all of the historical information. You can see as I scroll across here, or I could even widen the screen so it's a little bit easier for you to see. I can see the information in a report format from the inquiry window. So very helpful in the case of using inquiry windows to access information within the system. So that's inquiries and reports, and I mentioned that we can talk just a little bit about Smart Lists. Smart Lists allow you to basically view the data and do some of the same things that you can do within inquiries and reports. And so it's very helpful. The reports are usually more in like a spreadsheet format, sorting data. If you're looking for like pretty reports with nice headings and so forth, you probably don't want to use Smart Lists for that. But you certainly could use it if all you're looking for is data. So a similar type of report that you get out of the inquiry window where you can restrict data and set things up and get at the information that you want. But like I said, if you want a fancy report for your CEO with headings, etc., you're probably going to use something else like Excel reports, Word templates, or something like that. Standard reports within the application, they're built ready for use. That's kind of one of the benefits, and we talked about those and we saw some of the information there. Usually you can restrict in multiple ways, but we have other reporting tools, and including the Smart Lists, which we just touched on. Report Writer, which we've talked about briefly, you can use to modify or create new reports using that tool. And there's also some additional reporting options and have some of the most commonly used ones there. We have SQL reporting services, Excel reports, and Word templates. And all of those allow you some more flexibility. Word templates can make reports nice and neat. Excel reports give you some additional flexibility. And SQL reporting services takes advantage of some of the additional things you can do using SQL and SQL Server. So multiple ways to get reports out, including the standard reports that we took a look at. If you're interested in some of those more fancy ways of doing reports, there is a business intelligence course out on Microsoft Virtual Academy that you can go ahead and access that talks about all three of these areas within that course. So our last lesson within this module is help options, and we'll just briefly talk about the help options that are available. We have a help menu within the application. Within the application, we also have help buttons on most of the windows. So let's take a quick look there. So within the application, if I go ahead and go into a window, and I'm just going to use customer maintenance since we're here, you could certainly use the help menu here right off of the window menu bar. We talked about that earlier, where you can get help. And one of the most common things when you're in a window is, I want to know something about the window, right? I'm having trouble with the window. There's an option to go right to a choice that says about this window. So this is information specifically related to the customer maintenance window here. So it gives you some topics about the window, maybe how you add a customer record, for example. You can see here. Adding a customer card is shown. So choices related to the window. And then you can even get and drill down to get more additional help, in this case on the individual fields. So you can get information about fields, and the same capability is available there for buttons. So some additional information, and you can see even within the help there's some of these link fields. So if you're interested in a certain topic, in this case it's talking about email. So if you email a customer invoices, for example, or statements or something, you can get additional information even from the help by zooming to another part of the help. There's also a help button on every window, and if you take a look at most windows, there's an icon within the system that allows you to get to the help area pretty much the same way that you see on the help menu. And if you take a look at our customer maintenance window, the help button is located in the bottom right. And if I click on that, you can see I got to the same option. It's about this window because I'm on this window, and it gives me the same information that the help window allowed there. So I can go ahead and click on the same options here to learn more. I can go into fields, etc. And that is specific now to the individual window. So you can use both the help button or the help menu within the application to access help if you need some additional information about the window, or maybe a field within the window that you're working with. So what did we learn in Module 2? We learned how to use key elements of Microsoft Dynamics GP, such as the navigation page or area page. We use lookups and link fields to increase productivity in Microsoft Dynamics GP. We use notes to store and access additional data about records and windows. And we talked about inquiries and reports, and a little bit about help. Thank you for joining me for this Introduction to Microsoft Dynamics GP 2013 course. Hopefully it's provided you with some insight into what Microsoft Dynamics GP can offer you for your business.